In this video, we're going to be talking all about what to say at the end of your worship service. I'm going to share with you 3 steps to let people know, hey, the worship service has officially ended. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Coming up. Hey everybody, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com, your daily dose of practical worship leading tips. If you want to find those tips every single day, they aren't here on YouTube. I post once a week here on YouTube, but I'm posting every single day on Instagram and Facebook at Leading Worship Well. So go follow me over there. I'd love to connect with you there. That's where the majority of the community hangs out for now. But you are here on YouTube, and I am putting out a video every single week. So if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on those future worship leading tip videos, and maybe hit the like button while you're down there. But let's get into the topic today, and that is, what do you say at the end of your worship service? I want to share with you these 3 steps that are going to let people know that your worship service has ended. And let me set the scene for you, because maybe this has happened to you. I know that this happened to me a lot, especially when I first started leading worship, even up until like a few years ago, until I started to put these 3 steps into place. But the thing that happened was this. You plan for your worship service. You feel really good about it. And by the way, this video is part of a larger series, so go ahead and check out the playlist up here if you haven't seen the other videos. We've been talking all about what to say while leading worship. So the scenario is, you've prepared to lead worship. You know what you're going to say at the beginning of your worship service. You know what you're going to say between songs. You know what you're going to pray for. All of these things. But oftentimes we forget we got to end the service too. It depends how your service is set up, but for a lot of worship leaders, you are the last thing in your worship service. There is a song at the end of the service, and then it's like, what do I do now? So what happened to me, and what happens to a lot of worship leaders, is you finish that last song, strum that last chord, maybe you pray at the end, and you say, Amen, and people just stare at you. And it probably doesn't happen as long as we think it does, because we're up on stage. It's probably like 5 seconds, but it feels like an eternity, and they're just staring at you like, is that it? And you're like, okay, bye. You just don't know how to end things, and people don't know, is this the end? Are they going to do something else? So that's why I want to share with you these 3 steps that let people know that your worship service has ended. I want to show you how to eliminate that sort of awkward pause there where people don't know what's going to happen next. If you implement these 3 steps, it's going to let people know every single Sunday, hey, this is the end of the service. So feel free to walk out into the lobby, start talking to each other, all of that stuff. So what are these 3 steps? And I want to share with you what you need to say, but also some other things that you need to do. So what do you need to say? Well, this is the perfect time to pray. Prayer at the end of your service, there's just something about it. It just feels right. It should already be part of your regular routine as a church anyways, so just to have one more prayer at the end feels like it just wraps everything up. The end of your gathering is the perfect time to pray. It just puts that final, hey, this is the end, because we've ended in prayer. And that's because prayer can serve as a transition piece. Think about the other areas of your service. You probably pray before your pastor preaches. You lead a couple songs at the beginning, and then your pastor is about to come up, but before they do, you pray before they come up, because it serves as a transition piece. And then what happens after your pastor is done preaching? Well, you're going to do a song after that, so your pastor prays, and that serves as the transition back to you. And you're not just praying for the sake of praying. You're not just praying because you need a transition, but prayer is obviously an integral part of our weekly gatherings. But it still serves as a transition. So my question is, why not at the end of your service as well? Why wouldn't you use that as the final transition to say, hey, this has officially ended. Our service is done. Go hang out, go talk to people. It just makes sense to use it as a transition there. So the question is, well, what do I pray for? If you checked out last week's video, then you know that whenever you pray during a service, you should know what you're praying for. You don't just pray just because you think that you should pray, but there should be a purpose behind your prayer. So I showed you the question last week was to ask what's coming next, what's about to happen, and that's what you should pray for. So we asked this question at the end of our service now, what's coming next? And what's coming next? Well, a couple things. First of all, the week is coming next. You just started your week off right by worshiping together, and now you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday before you meet again for another Sunday gathering. So that's what's coming next. The week ahead is coming next, so you can pray for that. Now, what specifically are you praying for in the week? Well, I love to connect the final prayer with whatever your pastor preached on. Your pastor hopefully had a topic that they were preaching on, a main point, and you want to be listening for that while your pastor is preaching. I wrote a post on this before. Go check it out on leadingworshipwell.com. It's what you should be doing while your pastor is preaching, and one of those things is listening intently so that you actually know what they're talking about. Don't be hanging out in a different room. Be sitting there taking notes so that you can use what they talked about in your speaking transitions, and particularly this prayer at the end, because you want to pray specifically for that thing. So the week's coming up, what's coming up next, that's what we're going to pray for. The week's coming up, but we want to pray that we would do whatever the application point was that our pastor preached on. So if that's to share the gospel with one person, you could pray, God, as we leave this place, there's kind of some language that sets people's minds up to say, oh, we must be leaving soon. This is probably the end. God, as we leave this place, give us the boldness to share the gospel with someone. Something like that. Whatever your pastor preached on, pray for that in the lives of the people of your church. And that's what's coming up next. What's coming up next is they're going to go do whatever your pastor just preached on. So start off with prayer. Start your ending with prayer, I should say, because this is what we're saying at the end of your service. So it starts with prayer. You finish that last song and launch into a prayer. You start praying, and then at the very end of your prayer, you should consistently say the same thing at the end of your service. What do I mean by that? I mean that as you say the final part of your prayer, there should be some phrase or something that's extremely similar. It doesn't have to be exactly the same thing every time, although I think that helps, that you should be saying every single Sunday. And it might seem like a routine, and it is, but routine can be hurtful, but routines are also helpful. Obviously, we're aware in church where we don't want coming to worship just to be a routine. We want it to be something fresh, something exciting, but at the same time, routines, there is safety in routines. Routines are helpful because they let people know and get comfortable and say, okay, that happened. The routine is this is going to happen next. So in this specific case, the routine is, hey, the worship leader just said this. That means that the service is about to end. And so think of this, follow along with me for a second. Think of it as a catchphrase that signifies the end of your service. And when I say catchphrase, I'm not talking about like a cheesy sitcom catchphrase, like what you talking about, Willis, all right? I'm not talking about that kind of catchphrase. I'm just talking about something that you always say that just signifies the worship leader just said that. That means that we are about to end the service. And this sets people up. They hear that and they think, okay, things are about to end here. And it gets rid of that awkward moment that we were talking about. So what are some examples of things that you could say? Well, I want to share with you 3 here. These are kind of 3 different examples. Feel free to use any of these or make up your own. The first is this. You just prayed. So what do you say at the end of a prayer? You say amen, right? But I love to include the entire church in that amen, because you could say, God, thank you for blah, 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 amen. And then everybody kind of repeats it after you, but I love to say it all together. And how do you get people to say that all together? Well, a phrase that a lot of people know in the church, or you can at least teach your church, is you pray, God, thank you for blah, 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 help us to blah, 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 and all God's people said, Amen. This is actually a line that I stole from my co-worship leader. I don't even know if he realized that he was saying it at the end of every service, but I just noticed that he said it at the end of every service, and it just felt like that set the tone that this is the end. When we say, and all God's people said, and everybody says, Amen, it feels like, okay, we're done. So you can use that one, and all God's people said, and then everybody says amen. Here's another one you might consider using if you don't want to use that. You can just say your prayer, say amen, and then say, have a great week. We'll see you soon. Feels like the end to me, right? Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you soon. Whatever feels comfortable for you here. I want you to find something that feels authentic. You can use one of these. Maybe don't talk like this, though. Whatever feels authentic. What do you need to say that you can say every single week, week in and week out, that lets people know this is the end of the service? Here's one more for you. This is more, I think, like of a traditional environment. And I know that we do have some people who lead worship in a more traditional church. So maybe this works for you. I just threw this in here. I personally wouldn't say this because it doesn't really fit the context of my church, but it might work in yours. So feel free to use it. And that is, go in peace. May the Lord's face shine upon you. That doesn't feel particularly authentic when I say it, but maybe that's how you speak in your church. If it is, you can use that. The goal is not specifically to use one of these three things. You can say whatever you want. Feel free to use one of them. The goal is to just have a phrase that you say every single week at the end of your service, so that when people hear it, they know this is part of the routine. Routine isn't always a bad thing. It's actually helpful sometimes. And it's helpful in this way because when they hear that, they know, okay, this is the end of the service. We are done, finished. So far you've prayed, and then you've said the same thing that you've been saying for the past 4 weeks or however long it takes. This isn't going to happen instantly. You're going to say it once the first week, and then people will be like, oh, okay, I guess that was sort of the end. And then the second week you say it again, and now they're like, and it's subconscious. So they'll be subconsciously thinking, I kind of heard that last week. I'm starting to get the picture that when they say that, it's the end. And then 4 weeks in, 6 weeks in, whatever it is, you've said it 6 times in a row, and people know, okay, that's the end. So you've prayed, you've said that phrase, whatever it is for you, at the end of your service. And then the final step is you want to utilize additional cues to communicate that the service has ended. What do I mean by that? Well, sometimes words are not enough, and it still feels a little awkward. Sometimes you're still going to say that catchphrase, you're going to finish your prayer, whatever it is, and people are still going to stare at you because there are some additional cues that you need to implement that let people know this is the end of the service. And what are those cues? Well, here are a few other signals to let people know that it's the end. First of all, if you have lights for your stage, this is really important. If you don't have lights for your stage, don't worry. There's some other cues that you can use. But if you do have any sort of stage lighting, you want to turn the stage lights off. Communicate with whoever's in charge of running the lights for your stage. And now that you've got that catchphrase, you can say, hey, whenever I say, and all God's people said, amen, or have a great week, everyone, we'll see you soon. Whatever phrase you chose, tell the person who's in charge of your lights, when I say that, can you bring the lights down? Because the purpose of the lights is that it draws attention to an area. That's the purpose of lights in worship. So whenever you have the lights in your worship space dimmed and you've got lights on your stage lit, that draws everybody's attention to the front of the room, and they say, oh, well, there's something happening at the front of the room, so I need to pay attention there. That's why we use lights in worship. But the opposite of that is whenever you turn the stage lights off, people think, okay, well, I'm not supposed to pay attention there anymore because it got dark up there. Light draws attention to things. Darkness takes attention away from things. So whenever you communicate with whoever's in charge of the lights to, hey, you need to turn the lights off after I say that, that's the first additional cue that you can use to let people know, okay, this is the end of the service. Next thing you can do is turn the house music on. And I'm not talking about electronic dance music here, okay? I'm talking about music in the house speakers. So the lights come off, and then you slowly fade up some music, some pre-recorded music, not your band playing. I know some churches have their band keep playing. If that works for you, do it. But to me, it still feels like I need to stick around, like they're not quite done yet. So what I like to do at my church is have pre-recorded music play. So lights come down, house music comes up. There's another cue. Hey, music came on the speakers. They're not going to be talking through those speakers anymore because there's something else playing. I'm not looking at the stage anymore because the lights are off. It's probably time to go. That's probably the end of everything. And then here's the next thing that you can do. You bring up the room lights. Brought the lights down on the stage, brought the room lights up because now we want the attention to be on the other people in our church and we're interacting with them. And even think about this like the last time you went to see a movie in the theaters. What happened at the end of the movie? How did you know it was over? Well, the credits rolled, but then at the end of the credits, they brought the room lights up. Right? And you were like, oh, this is the end because I'm not focusing on the movie screen anymore. They brought the lights up. It's time to go. So there's another cue, one more cue. This is for you to do. And that is to walk off stage. Too often, and I'm guilty of it too, you finish, and let me just start with the first step. The first step is to back away from the microphone. I think part of my problem, at least, and I've seen it with other worship leaders too, is at the end of your service, you say your piece, you say amen, you say that catchphrase, and then you just kind of linger around the microphone. And what's that communicate? That communicates, hey, that person might be about to say something else because they're still close to the microphone. So at the end of whatever you say, confidently step back from the microphone. You can even turn around because if you turn your back on the congregation, that communicates too that you're done leading them for that moment. Then go put your instrument down and get off stage. You shouldn't be hanging out on stage anyways. I see this, and I was a part of, whenever I was younger and I was leading worship for the first time, I didn't really like to go out and talk to the people in my church, so I would just hang out on stage with the rest of the worship team. That's not what you should be doing. You should be going out into your church, talking to the people and getting to know them a little bit better. Get to know the people that you're leading in worship. So you walk off stage, and then you're not up there anymore, and it's like, okay, this is definitely the end because there's nobody up on stage anymore. The lights are off, the music's on, the room lights are up, and there's nobody on stage. That's the end. So you can utilize those 4 additional cues along with prayer at the end and that catchphrase to signify this is indeed the end of the service. Quick recap to show you how that would work, and then I have an additional tip for you. What do? You pray at the end of your service. You say your ending phrase, and then you utilize those additional cues. And if you do this routine for a couple weeks in a row, maybe 4 weeks in a row, people will become familiar with it, and they'll know this is the end of the service. And you won't even need to communicate it as much as you think you do because you've built that routine. And obviously, you're going to have new people in your church every week, and not everybody is going to know what that routine is. But the majority of the people at your church will know, and their body language will then in turn tell other people that it's the end of the service as well, because they know the routine, they know what's about to happen. You just said that phrase you always say, the lights went off, music came on, and they turn around and start talking to people, and everybody's like, oh, that's the end of the service. So that's how you communicate, this is the end of the service. You do those three things: pray, say your ending catchphrase, not in a cheesy way, just whatever's authentic, and then utilize those additional cues. Hey, this was video number 4, I think, in this series that we've been doing about what to say while leading worship. So far, we've talked about what to say at the beginning of your worship service, what to say between songs, how to pray, and we just talked about what to say at the end of your service. Well, we've got one more video in this series, but I need your help for it because it's going to be a Q&A question. I've already got some questions from email and some questions from Instagram, but if you want your question to be answered, you can ask me anything about speaking in worship. There's probably something that I forgot to cover because there's a lot that goes on when it comes to speaking in worship. So anything about speaking in worship is fair game. If you've got a question, leave a comment below, send me a DM on Instagram, send me an email, whatever you want to do. And just ask the question. Say, hey, this is a question for the What to Say While Leading Worship Q&A video. And then ask your question. And I just might answer it in the next video. I've got about 5 questions so far, so keep them coming. I'd love to answer your questions. And one last thing before you go. 5 tips to instantly improve your worship leading is a free audio training that I put together. If you want to take your worship leading to the next level, you can listen to this audio training completely free. You discover 5 simple tips that will instantly improve your worship leading. You can find it by clicking the link in the description below or heading to leadingworshipwell.com. Thanks so much for joining me, everyone. Make sure to check out my channel, the rest of the videos. Keep leading worship well. I'll see you next time. Have a good one, everyone.